Story 1 received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her and her husband in the past, so I recognized her voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulance advised that they have 15-minute ETA. She lived in a very rural part of WV. I'm talking to her, asking about her husband and how he was doing, and just making small talk with her. The ambulance calls in and advises they are on scene, and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to the door to go answer the door, and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Pretty normal, yeah? Well, here's where it gets weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute later and advises no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff unit who was in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address and advised he is breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios in asking who the caller was. I advise it was the elderly female who lived at the residence. He tells me that he's going to call in and needs to speak with the supervisor on shift. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the information that I gave him and asks what's going on. Apparently, the elderly female had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back and confirmed that it was the female who called. The ambulance transferred the hospital, and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. Story 2, I'm interning with the Sheriff's Police Department, so most of my time is spent on patrol. We got called out to do a wellness check, which the deputy thought was going to be a piece of cake, like she was out of town or something. We get there and are met by the neighbors who told us that the mail is piling up in the mailbox and that there are several untouched packages on the porch. Okay, so we go up the house and the front door is unsecured. So we crack open the door a couple of inches and the deputy calls inside. But the door won't move anymore. The house was one of those split houses where the stairs meet at the front door and the upstairs and downstairs are offset. So we concluded that there might be stuff behind the door. It's about this time that the deputy tells me that she is a known hoarder, and that could be why the door was stuck. He also mentions that if we see flies on the inside of the windows, she is most likely inside and deceased. As we walk around the side of the house, we notice a lot of flies on the windows. The back door was locked, and as we looked in, we noticed bags on bags of garbage diapers and misc shit all over the place. We head back to the front and attempt to make entry. He pushes the door open, this time with more force, and from underneath I see a grease-like liquid spreading out from under the door. The deputy stops, closes the door, and calmly tells me that the lady was indeed dead and wedged behind the door. From the dates of the packages, we concluded that she had been gone about 2 months. Once we did make entry into the house, I was allowed inside. After 2 months, she didn't even look like a human corpse. Her skin and body had sagged and melted to the floor, and her face was all black and had been eaten to the bone by maggots. I'll never forget the smell when the coroners moved her and she popped. It was like a physical presence. Whatever those people get paid to deal with that shit, it's not enough. The thing that really got to me, though, was wondering if she had fallen down the stairs and died there, or if she fell and was unable to move and waited for help that would never come. Story 3 went to a welfare check. A neighbor called in. He hasn't seen this guy for a few days, and the lights have been on for a while. I go and look around and find no footprints or tire marks in the snow. Recent storm. I check the garage and nothing. I checked the house, which was unlocked, and found the guy's cell phone, keys, wallet, and cash with the TV on. That's when I realized this was now a dead body search. I looked everywhere in and outside the house and around the garage. There were several old junk vehicles on the property, but again, no tire marks or shoe prints or anything. I call all recent numbers on his phone, and no one's heard from him. Only so much I can do, so I issue a BOL, and we start getting NCIC paperwork ready. Next day, the day shift officer goes over to follow up. Turns out the guy was plowing his driveway and either had a medical condition or something, and either passed out or died on the spot and crashed the truck onto the other junk cars, which then caught on fire. Edit, investigation leads to the fact this happens a week before I got this call, leaving only a pile of bones in the front seat covered in snow. I felt like shit for not finding him that night. but it was really creepy knowing his remains were inches away from where I was searching. Story 4. I'm not a cop, but my dad just recently shared these stories with me. My grandfather was a cop in a small town in the 60s, 70s. Late at night, it was common for officers to pull over vehicles driving through town, especially if they didn't recognize them. He pulls over a busload of people. He walks through and asks them where they are headed, yada yada. They were headed to California. It was Charles Manson and his group. Another story, same grandfather, same stop a car passing through protocol. Asked the driver where he was headed, BS'd for a while, and told the guy to have a nice evening. Few towns over, guy gets pulled over again, shoots and kills the cop. Apparently he was doing this as he drove along. Get pulled over and shoot the cop. When they questioned him, he said he had been pulled over by my grandfather, but he was such a nice guy he didn't kill him. But he did have the gun sitting in his lap. Story 5. Got a report of a missing husband. He told his wife and family of 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but never returned, and this was 12 hours ago. They had purchased another house in a neighboring community, and the relationship with the wife was under pressure, so the wife assumed he was staying at the other house and claimed he would never kill himself. The strange thing about this report, though, was that he emptied his personal bank account into his wife's this morning as well. The wife explained this off, saying that they recently had a fight about finances, and he agreed that he was bad at money and maybe they should just have a joint account that she controls. On a hunch, I asked his 14-year-old boy if there were any areas in the mountains nearby that his father enjoyed going, and the son identified a road about 10 miles away. It was nearing midnight, but I decided to drive to the top of this old and abandoned Forest Service road. As I drove through the snow and started to climb the road, I felt a gut feeling that I would 100% find this guy up there, either thinking about or already acted out a suicide. The snow-laid gravel road had some sign of travel, but no real indication of how fresh the vehicle tracks could be. As I reached the top of the road after an hour of travel, I was honestly surprised that I did not find his black truck. I spent the drive back down thinking about gut feelings and how they are unreliable, but that I somehow felt different about this one. As I traveled up the road, I did notice over a dozen smaller roads branching off, but they were not mapped, and I had already spent too much time on a single occurrence in a busy city with too few police officers. Nonetheless, I decided to check a single of these secondary roads, and about 3/4 of the way down, I picked a road at random to check, and sure enough, my headlights lit up the back end of a black truck about 100 yards past the first corner. Even if I hadn't memorized the license plate beforehand, I wouldn't have had to run it. It was clearly his. I radioed that I had found the truck, parked my vehicle, and traveled the 20 feet to his truck with my heart beating like I was doing it at a sprint rather than a normal walk. What I found inside was a mess of brains and blood caused by a self-inflicted shotgun wound under the chin. I'll save you from the description. There was just something about that gut feeling while traveling this abandoned and quiet mountain road, followed by a sense of being tricked by the gut feeling, then finding out it was true by discovering such a gruesome scene, having to wait 3 hours next to his truck, waiting for body removal, and then to end it all by having to go to the family who was expecting good news to deliver to them the worst news possible. That makes me feel creeped out to this day. Story 6 responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard, pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance, hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform, holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather an infant corpse, and several people stopped by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare and my wife at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. Story 7 was new on the force and sent to a home invasion in progress late in the night. I noticed my training officer didn't seem to be too concerned and responded slowly as opposed to the normal emergency response for crimes in progress. Upon arrival, he asked me if I had been to the home before. After I said no, he told me to go handle the call. As I walked towards the home, the garage opened and an elderly lady who was bent at a 90-degree angle at her waist hobbled out. Without looking at me, she said to hurry due to the fact that the 2 black male suspects were still in the home. She used much more colorful and racist language. I noted that she couldn't straighten her back and realized she was a bit off mentally. I then walked into the home with her behind me. While my eyes adjusted to the interior, I heard a click. I turned to find the lady locking 2 padlocks on the interior of the door. I then noted, as we were within the kitchen, that every cabinet and pantry also had a secured padlock on their doors. I looked down the hallway and found that every interior door of the small home was shut and secured with padlocks. I followed the elderly woman down the hall to the second door on the left. She began to unlock the padlock to the door and shouted, "They are in here!" To my surprise, within the room, there was an older white guy sitting at a table using a desktop computer. He looked at me, greeted me, identified himself as the woman's husband, and then went back to whatever he was doing. The woman then pointed at an empty chair and began to yell, "They are under the chair! Oh no, they just ran outside right there!" The woman was pointing at a wall. After waiting for the woman to lock her husband back into the room, and then waiting for her to let me out of the kitchen door, I cursed my training officer and hightailed it out of there. That was my first exposure to mental illness, and it was creepy. My training officer said the woman had supposedly been raped by 2 black males years ago, which had caused her mental break and her animosity towards those of the race. Story 8. I was a parks officer for a downtown metropolitan out in the Pacific Northwest. I saw my fair share of weird stuff on my 1700 Horro 100 shift. Naked bike ride after party at midnight with about 1,000 or so naked people chilling out. The occasional couple having sex. Homeless person masturbating or shooting up heroin, and the occasional dead body were all a normal part of the job. Anyways, this one night we were sent to investigate a tent set up relatively near the waterfront, which was generally a homeless person that was trying to stay dry for the night. So we get there around 23:30 and tell the lady inside that she has to go a few hundred yards away to an area that isn't patrolled. She fusses and bitches about having to move, then mentioned a man living in a cave at the bottom of a shallow ravine nearby that's been killing small animals and eating them. We ask her for more information, and she points to a general area about 50 yards away through some thick brush. The general area most people wouldn't wander past. My partner and I start to walk through the thick brush with just our flashlights and eventually stumble upon the ravine, and sure enough, there is a small opening on the side enough for a person to fit in. I scale down about 20 feet and peek inside the opening and see what seems like a massive pile of magazines, torn pages, articles of clothing, a sugar cookie tin, a gorilla costume hand, some crude-looking tools including a makeshift bow, a few knives, and other generally weird shit. Being curious, in that the cave was empty, I opened the sugar cookie tin and found a large amount of what seemed like raw animal meat. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked the fuck out and decided to unask the area and inform the police of what I had found. We didn't carry weapons. We never found out what came of the guy who was staying there or what was going on there, but definitely freaky at around midnight in pitch black conditions.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.